This episode of Baking Wisdom is brought to you by LG Canada, and we'll hear more from them later in the episode. Welcome to Baking Wisdom. This series is based on my newest cookbook of the very same name, where I share my decades of baking experience with you, and of course, tons of recipes, all to make you the best baker you can be. And now it's time to gear up for the holidays. I love holiday baking. And on this episode, we're getting into holiday baking. I am so excited. I love baking for the holidays. And my gift to you is not to make one recipe in this episode, but three. 3 recipes ideal for your holiday cookie tin. I am making a chewy chocolate brownie cookie, a walnut snowball cookie, and then the third is a square, my almond streusel squares. And they all have a great make-ahead component so you can get into your holiday baking right now. And that's what I'm going to do. Let's start with those chewy brownie cookies. The first thing I need to do, just like making brownies, is melt some butter and chocolate together. So this is couverture baking chocolate. It goes into the bowl, and I've got some unsalted butter. At this point, it doesn't matter what temperature the butter is. And I'm putting this over direct heat, which means I want to melt the butter and chocolate together at a very low temperature while stirring. If you're unsure about melting chocolate over direct heat, what you can do is place it in a metal bowl over a pot of gently boiling water and just stir gently until it's melted. Either way, just want to melt the butter and chocolate together. Oh, we should preheat the oven because as soon as this cookie batter is done, it goes into the oven. You want to preheat your oven to 375. My chocolate is melted, so I've just set it off the heat to cool a little bit. You can work with the chocolate still warm. You don't have to cool it to room temperature. But while it sits for a minute, let's get the base for these chewy brownie cookies ready. I've got 2 whole eggs. And in goes a 50-50 mix of granulated sugar and light brown sugar. I'll add my vanilla. And then just by hand, you don't need to pull out the beaters for this. I do like to whip up the brown sugar, the white sugar, and the eggs a little bit. This gives the brownie cookies a bit of structure so they don't flatten out too much. So I just whisk by hand for a minute until I see it go a slightly lighter color. Using room temperature eggs makes this happen a lot faster because the sugar will dissolve. All right, I can see that just after a minute, the batter is aerated a little bit. It's actually grown in volume and it's a little bit paler, but you don't have to look for any specific visual marker. Give it a minute, you know you're good. Now I can add my melted chocolate and butter. Keep things tidy, and just gently whisk in that melted chocolate. This recipe is so easy, we're already at the point where we sift in our dry ingredients. Just a little bit of flour, cocoa powder, a little bit of baking powder, and some fine salt. And then gently whisk this in. The method for this recipe really is like making brownies, except of course we're going to bake them as cookies. Once everything is smooth and evenly combined, it's time for your add-ins, just like when you're making brownies. You could add walnut pieces or pecan pieces. I'm going full chocolate, so I'm adding some white chocolate chips. I'll fold those in, and this is a key point with this recipe. When you first combine everything, you will find that the batter is really quite fluid. But as the cocoa powder absorbs the liquid and as the chocolate in there begins to cool and set a little bit, you will find that this batter thickens up. So if you find it difficult to scoop, if you find it's this fluid, honestly, just walk away. 2 minutes later, it will thicken up. So I'm going to do just that. I had just enough time to collect my other ingredients for the next cookie recipe, and in that time, just 2 minutes, that batter has definitely thickened up. It will still be soft, you don't need to set it, but now it's easier to scoop. This recipe makes 2 dozen cookies. Of course, if you want to make daintier ones for the cookie exchange, you can just use a smaller scoop. A little bit of holiday baking wisdom. If you want to scoop and portion these cookies ahead of time but bake them later, what you can do, scoop them, chill them, and then pull them up and pack them in a resealable container. That way you can freeze them, thaw them to room temperature, and they're ready to bake whenever you're ready to bake. These really take no time to bake, 8 to 10 minutes, so make sure you set that timer. I love that my walnut snowball recipe is a quick one to whip up, and this is a perfect recipe for the freezer. The first thing I need to do is grind my walnuts into the flour. If I pre-grind the walnuts, they may be too oily and not blend into the cookie dough well. So I've got my full measure of flour and untoasted walnut pieces. In they go. I'll give this a quick pulse. There, the walnuts are nicely ground into the flour, so I can add my other dry ingredients, my little bit of salt and icing sugar. And it's amazing how when you make shortbread cookies, they don't call for a lot of sugar. It really is a short dough. It's about the butter richness. Give this a quick buzz. And now it's time to add all that butter. I think a shortbread cookie is a key addition, a cornerstone of a holiday cookie tin. I will add just a splash of vanilla. That is the only liquid to add to a shortbread cookie dough. And what qualifies as shortbread is no egg and no baking powder or other leavener. I'll pulse this until the dough comes together. And now that I can see that my top and bottom in texture match a little more, now I can turn it on and let it form a ball as it mixes. And there it is, walnut snowball dough. And I still have 3 minutes on the timer before it's time to check those chewy brownie cookies. Just let the cookie dough out. You can scoop this dough if you wish. It makes 4 dozen little snowball cookies, but I find it actually easier to just use a bench scraper, or you can use a knife on a cutting board, and divide your dough into 4 equal pieces, like so. That one is not so equal, there. Then you shape each piece of dough loosely into a roll. You can flour your hands if you need to. And then this, because I've got 4 and the recipe makes 4 dozen, I divide each into 12. So into half, into quarters, and then each of these are easier to cut more proportionately into 3. And it works very, very quickly. And if you're doing this, you probably are noticing how soft the dough is. So it makes it easy to shape into a ball, but we're gonna have to chill this dough. If I were to bake these walnut snowballs unchilled, because of the soft butter, even without any egg or baking powder, they would flatten out a little bit. And we want to keep their snowball shape as much as possible. If you were making this cookie dough recipe ahead of time, once you've chilled these, you could easily freeze them, pack them up, and then once again, thaw them just a little bit, not to room temperature, before you bake them. Let's check on those chewy brownie cookies. Oh, they are, no wonder they look good because I could smell them. They've got that lovely crackle to the top of them, just like a chocolate brownie. Oh. The chewy brownie cookies are too fragile to handle while they're hot, so you want to let them cool on the tray completely. I'm going to pop these snowball cookies into the fridge for 2 hours to chill. The chewy brownie cookies will cool, and so it's a perfect time to hear from our sponsor. This recipe is brought to you by LG Canada and the versatile LG Pro Bake Convection range. Perfectly cook all your favorite crispy recipes, including falafels and pizza and wings, all your family favorites, in one oven using LG's built-in large capacity air fryer. The air fry setting circulates hot air at high speeds for an even cook every time. You can also count on LG's Pro Bake Convection setting to deliver precise heat, which is especially important in multi-rack baking. Because the element is at the back of the oven, not the bottom, air is distributed evenly to all racks. This means your cookies, appetizers, and more will be perfectly and evenly cooked every time. This range also has an air sous vide setting. With its low and consistent heat, you can lock in flavors, so you can slowly and gently cook vacuum-sealed foods or other slow-cooked recipes. Keep an eye on your baking and cooking, and keep the heat inside with the InstaView door. 2 quick knocks on the door lights up the oven so you can check on your progress without letting out the heat. Bring the sleek design of the LG Pro Bake Convection range to your kitchen. Now it's time for the third holiday cookie tin edition, and this time it's a square, not a cookie. I'm making my almond jam streusel squares. And it starts by actually making a streusel topping. So I've got my ground almonds, along with flour and brown sugar and some cinnamon. They all get combined together in a mixing bowl. No need to sift anything. Here goes the brown sugar and teaspoon of cinnamon. I will be using this pastry blender to work the butter into this streusel, so I'm just using that instead of a spoon here, just to combine everything. I've got my butter cut into pieces and it's cool. It's not ice cold, but it's not room temperature either. That way it works into the streusel easily, but it isn't easily overworked. So first I toss it around in the bowl to coat it with the dry ingredients. But when you first start using a pastry blender with your butter, when you first start cutting the butter in, this is inevitable. It will stick to the pastry blender. As you're cutting it in, you give your hand a little twist and it breaks up the pieces a bit more. And so this streusel never comes together as a dough, but when you see it starting to clump up, you don't see any visible pieces of butter, but it starts to form a few clumps of its own, then you know it's ready. And here's another little bit of holiday baking wisdom for you. This streusel, well, it's a streusel. So you can pack it in an airtight container or in a jar and store it in the freezer or the fridge and use it as a streusel topping. If you're making a banana bread or some holiday muffins and you want to add a little character to it, just a nice spoonful on top of your batter before it goes into the oven. Great. Another thing you can do, I'm just full of gifts this holiday season, is spread this streusel on a baking tray and bake it for about 20 minutes. Then, because it's cooked, you can crumble it into pieces, store it in an airtight container on your counter, and layer that with yogurt and fruit, and all of a sudden you've got a decadent holiday parfait, perfect for brunch. All right, that butter seems to be evenly worked in. The streusel is a rough, crumbly texture. If I squeeze it, it holds together, but it breaks apart easily, so I know I'm ready. Got my square baking pan lined with parchment paper, and I'm going to pour 2/3 of the streusel into the bottom of the pan. Spread it around, and then lightly press it into the bottom of the pan. I've got raspberry jam as a filling, but of course use your favorite flavor of jam. It could be orange marmalade, it could be apricot. You could even dollop different flavors. And that way, one batch of squares offers 3 or 4 different flavors. Just gonna spoon this on. I did give the jam a stir, just so it's easier to spread. And I'm gonna use my offset spatula for this. A little palette knife or an offset will work. Don't worry, when you're spreading the jam, if you find a few streusel crumbs kind of come up as you're moving the jam around, it's absolutely okay. It all bakes together in the end, but you will see the distinct jam layer. Preheat your oven to 325. Now the remaining streusel goes on top, and this time you don't want to press it down quite as firmly. So spread it around and just a gentle press to make sure it's level. And this goes into that 325 oven for 45 minutes. And in that time, hey, I can get those walnut snowball cookies baked. Now that my snowball cookies have had a chance to chill, they're easy to handle, and I can line them up on my baking tray. I do 8 rows of 6, because the nice thing about the snowball cookies, they don't move or spread a whole lot, so you can pack a lot more cookies onto a tray when you're baking shortbread than you can other cookies. If you've watched my other Oh Yum cookie recipes, you know when it comes to baking ahead for the holidays, I like to make all my doughs ahead of time, portion them, freeze them, and then bake them when I want them freshly baked, either for gift giving or just enjoying. Any of the recipes I'm making today can be baked and then frozen and simply thaw to pack up or to eat. The snowball cookies take about 20 minutes to bake, and so they'll be out of the oven and cooling before the streusel squares are even done. Everything is baked and ready to pack up. I have my almond streusel squares and I let them cool and I chill them down before I cut them. Once you pack them into your cookie tin, they can sit at room temperature. I just find they're easier to cut when they're cold. So first thing I'll do, pop them right out. Comes the parchment. And I do like to give them a little dusting of icing sugar. Not too much. Portion them up into squares. With streusel squares, I don't find I have to trim off the ends. In fact, personally, I like that end piece where the jam is a bit caramelized from being at the edge of the pan. Look at that, you can see that beautiful jam layer, the cinnamony streusel filling. It's so delicious. And a perfect size, proportionate with the snowball cookies, and then we have the jumbo chewy brownie cookies. That off to the side while we finish our snowballs. So you can tell when a snowball cookie is done. It won't color or brown at all on the surface. You just lift one gently up and you should see just a hint of light brown on the bottom. Then they are ready to roll in the icing sugar. When it comes to rolling your snowball cookies in icing sugar, you want to make sure they are completely cooled. If they're still warm, they'll hold on to the icing sugar and the heat will melt the icing sugar, and then they just become a little bit sticky. As you can see, you get a nice coating. I can do 2 at a time, who am I kidding? If I'm baking my snowball cookies ahead to freeze, I hold off on the icing sugar roll until after I've pulled them from the fridge and thawed them completely for that same reason, so the icing sugar stays in place. Oh, so many cookies and accomplished in such a short amount of time. So first I'll arrange a few on a plate and then get some ready for the cookie tin. That's a lovely plate to put out after dinner. And then for gifting, pack them up as you wish. These are also ideal for bringing to that holiday cookie exchange. Nice assortment that I can fit just over a dozen in there. Now I know you are set for the holidays. You've got 3 delectable recipes, different flavors, different textures. You are going to be a hit at the holiday cookie exchange. I wish you and yours the best for this holiday season, and I will see you again for another episode of Baking Wisdom. There's always time for another cookie. So soft in the center.